The 2024 college football regular season is now over, and the 2025 transfer portal is already going crazy. Today, I want to go back in time a year. We're to go back and look at the number one transfer recruit for each and every SEC school and talk about how they did in 2024. There's a lot of crazy names on there. There are some big-time quarterbacks, some big-time 5-stars who flamed out, and other guys who went completely under the radar. As I said, we're going to go through each and every SEC school and talk about how their highest rated transfer did. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and work our way from the bottom of the standings to the top. The team that finished dead last this year was the Mississippi State Bulldogs, as they went 0-8 in the conference and 2-10 overall. Their most highly rated transfer was a tight end by the name of Cameron Ball, and he was actually listed as a 4-star transfer. The 6'6" tight end ended up playing a couple of years at Buffalo, but for some reason was listed as a 4-star transfer despite only having 8 catches while he was at Buffalo. This past season he didn't even play tight end, as he ended up playing on the defensive side of the ball, registering 2 total tackles. I don't know if this is some sort of glitch, but for being Mississippi State's most highly rated transfer, this is sad, because a guy like Kevin Coleman was only ranked as a 3-star transfer and he had a really good year, and same with Blake Shapen. The next team we need to talk about is the Kentucky Wildcats. They finished second to last in the SEC Conference at 1-7 in the conference and 4-8 overall, and their most highly ranked transfer was Jamin Dumas Johnson. At one point, he was a 4-star recruit, and he decided to leave Georgia in favor of the Kentucky Wildcats. This past year, Jamin Dumas Johnson actually had a decent season, as he finished with 39 total tackles, 3.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 1 interception. His 3 years at Georgia ended up translating to 2024, as he actually had a pretty solid season, and this wasn't a terrible pickup for the Cats. Up next, we have the Auburn Tigers, and we have to talk about Keandre Lambert-Smith. He was the most highly ranked transfer that Hugh Freeze brought in, and Lambert-Smith 100% hit. After spending a couple of years at Penn State after being a blue-chip recruit in high school, he used his final year and ended up having 50 catches for a career-high 981 yards and a career-high 8 touchdowns. Lambert-Smith had a really solid season and was at times their best playmaker, and will likely head off to the NFL draft. I think he'll get drafted in the later rounds, and this was a really good pickup for the Tigers. So the next team we need to talk about is the Oklahoma Sooners, as they ended up going 6-6 with a 2-6 mark in the SEC, and their top transfer was a guy by the name of Caden Woolard, who was from Miami of Ohio and was an edge rusher. After originally being a 3-star recruit, Woolard would end up blowing up while he was at Miami of Ohio, as he had a really good 2023 campaign with 9.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles. Unfortunately, that would not translate to his time at OU, as this past year he had 13 total tackles with 1 pass deflection and 1.5 sacks. It does seem like there was some sort of injury issue for Caden though, so there is a bit of an asterisk, but either way, he didn't end up living up to the hype. Vanderbilt enjoyed a breakout 2024 season due in large part to the transfer portal, with guys like Diego Pavia and Eli Stowers, but the main highly recruited dude at Vanderbilt was Nate Johnson, and he didn't end up doing anything. After becoming a blue-chip quarterback at high school, Johnson would spend 2 years at Utah, and he got a little bit of playing time in 2023 before he would transfer to Vanderbilt, hoping to get the starting nod. He battled out with Pavia all offseason, but unfortunately he would end up losing the job, and this past year he completed 1 pass for a total of 12 yards. I don't believe Pavia has any eligibility left, so Johnson should have an opportunity to start this upcoming year, or at least compete for it, but on paper, Nate Johnson did not end up living up to the hype for the Commodores. Okay, so the next guy we need to talk about is Ja'Quinden Jackson. At one point, Jackson was a 4-star quarterback coming out of high school and was in the same class as Hudson Card when he would arrive at Texas. Jackson would not end up getting an opportunity to do much, so he'd eventually transfer over to Utah in hopes of starting. That would not end up happening, so eventually he switched to running back in 2022, and during his 2 years at Utah, he had nearly 1,300 yards with about 13 touchdowns. Looking for one more season to improve his stat line and hopefully go off to the NFL, he transferred to Arkansas in 2024 and became the Razorbacks' top-rated transfer. So far this season, he'll have one more bowl game to play in, but he's rushed for 790 yards with 15 touchdowns. At one point, Jackson was seen as a top 3 running back in the SEC, but he has struggled with a little bit of injury issue, and Arkansas also has some depth at the running back spot, but in total, Ja'Quinden Jackson has done a great job, and he was a great pickup for the Razorbacks. So the top-ranked transfer for the Florida Gators was former 5-star recruit Cormani McClain. At one point, coming out of Lakeland High School, he was seen as one of the future stars in college football, and after originally going to Colorado, he would sort of get in some trouble and would decide to enter the 2024 transfer portal. He would sign with Florida and became the Gators' top transfer player, but he would end up struggling to fit there, as there were rumors he was going to get kicked off the team, he didn't see eye to eye with the coaching staff, and ultimately he barely played this year. In 2024, he finished with 5 tackles and 1 interception, which ended up being a pick 6. And there's sort of an asterisk on McClain because he's dealt with all those off-the-field issues, but if he comes back for another year, he definitely has the talent to be a really good player, especially in the SEC, and the jury is still out on his long-term success at Florida. Okay, so for the Missouri Tigers, their top transfer this past season was Caden Green. Coming out of Kansas City, Caden Green was seen as one of the top offensive tackle prospects in the class of 2023, but would decide to spurn Mizzou in favor of Oklahoma. After spending 1 year starting on and off for them as a freshman, Green would eventually enter the transfer portal, where he decided to go back to Mizzou and became a key part of their offensive line. I believe Green started pretty much the entire season, and he did have some sophomore moments, but it looks like Caden Green will probably be one of the top offensive linemen in 2025 in the SEC and has a legit NFL future. In my opinion, this was a really solid pickup for Mizzou, and the top 15 transfer ended up being a hit for them. The Ole Miss Rebels pumped a ton of money into NIL in the transfer portal in 2024, and the top guy they got was Walter Nolan. After becoming the #1 recruit in the country coming out of Tennessee, Nolan would spend his first 2 years at Texas A&M, where he was solid but at the same time a little bit underwhelming. He had 4 sacks in 2023 with the Aggies. He became the #3 overall player in the 2024 portal, and at Ole Miss this season, he's so far registered 48 tackles, 2 pass deflections, and 6.5 sacks. The interior offensive lineman has become one of the best in the country and was a key part of the Rebels' defense this year. Sadly, Ole Miss ended up losing 3 games, so they're likely not going to get into the playoff, so I bet Nolan will opt out of the bowl game and will probably be a first or second round pick, and at minimum a top 50 draft prospect in 2025 this spring. The LSU Tigers ended up having a pretty good transfer portal haul, and the top ranked player they had was Jardine Gilbert. Coming out of University High School, he was ranked as a 4-star blue chip recruit after he had 35 tackles and 2 interceptions as a senior. He'd spend his first 3 years at Texas A&M, in which he started 10 games as a sophomore in 2022, and then would start his first 2 games in 2023 before having an injury. Gilbert would end up transferring to LSU for the 2024 college football season, and this past year he finished with 45 total tackles, 2 pass deflections, half a sack, a forced fumble, and an interception. In my opinion, he was just a solid average starting player, but he, like a couple of other players on this list, ended up having both a concussion and some sort of shoulder injury, so there is also a little bit of an asterisk on his name as well. Texas A&M enjoyed a breakout season in year 1 under new head coach Mike Elko, and part of that was because of their big-time transfer portal addition in Nick Scorton. Coming out of Bryan High School in Texas, Nick Scorton was an Aggies fan, but never got that offer from them. He ended up having a couple of Power 4 offers and would eventually sign with Purdue. Also, he used to go by Nick Carraway instead of Nick Scorton. His freshman year wasn't anything to write home about at Purdue, but then as a sophomore, he absolutely blew up. He finished with 50 tackles, 10 sacks, and a forced fumble, and decided to enter the portal and became one of the top players in the portal. In his 1 year at Texas A&M, Scorton would finish with 27 total tackles, 5 sacks, and even 1 forced fumble. He also had 2 pass deflections, and both his athletic potential and his stat line has him as a potential first-round draft pick this upcoming spring, and while maybe his stat line was a little bit underwhelming, Scorton was definitely a huge pickup for the Aggies. For South Carolina, their main pickup was Rocket Sanders out of the portal. At one point coming out of Florida, Raheem Sanders was a 4-star recruit and blew up immediately while he was at Arkansas. In his first 3 years with the Razorbacks, he became one of the top players in the SEC, as a sophomore he rushed for 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns. Unfortunately, his 2023 season was a major downfall, so he decided to transfer to South Carolina for one final year. So far this season with the Gamecocks, he's helped lead them to a breakout season in which he ran the ball for 881 yards with 11 touchdowns. Sanders definitely saved his career and has an opportunity to get even better stats and could play in the college football playoff if some crazy stuff happens, but that's likely not going to happen anymore. Either way, Sanders did save his career, was a good pickup for the Gamecocks, and will likely hear his name called this spring in the 2025 NFL Draft. The Alabama Crimson Tide had a lot happen this past offseason as Nick Saban would retire and a lot of players would enter the transfer portal. Technically, the Tide's top transfer was Caden Proctor, but he never actually left. He just had some sort of weird saga with Iowa, so their highest ranked guy was actually offensive lineman Parker Brailsford. He was one of those guys who came in alongside Kalen DeBoer, as Brailsford played a couple of years at Washington before he ended up transferring over to Alabama. He was seen as a blue chip recruit coming out of high school, and would spend 2 years at Washington, including being a freshman All-American. This past season with the Tide, he ended up starting all 11 games for them, and ended up being a really spectacular player for them on their offensive line. Up next, we have another offensive lineman, as the Tennessee Volunteers got a couple of big-time transfers, and the top guy was Lance Hurd. He was at one point a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, and the 6'6" phenom ended up first going to LSU, where he was a freshman All-American in 2023. He would then transfer over to Tennessee. He has quickly become one of the better offensive linemen in the SEC, and with one more good year in 2025, I'm pretty certain he will be a top-end NFL draft pick. As we get to our second to last school, be sure to take a quick moment to like the video if you want to support what I'm doing here. So Georgia always has a lot of guys transfer out, and they usually get the cream of the crop in terms of transfers coming in. Their most highly ranked player was a kid by the name of London Humphreys. After being a 3-star recruit coming out of high school, Humphreys would arrive at Vanderbilt in 2023, where he caught 22 passes for 439 yards and 4 touchdowns. Humphreys would enter the 2024 transfer portal and quickly would go over to Georgia to try and help fill the void of a couple guys lost to the NFL. This past season, Humphreys caught 15 passes for 244 yards and 2 total touchdowns, but had a weird situation happen where he apparently had mono for part of the year, and also Georgia's offense was kind of night and day depending on the week. Humphreys definitely wasn't bad, but I'd like to see him improve a little bit more in 2025. Okay, so the final team and player we need to talk about is Texas wide receiver Isaiah Bond. After being a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, Bond would spend his first couple of years in Tuscaloosa with the Crimson Tide. In 22 and 23, he was a solid part of the offense, and in 2023, he broke out with 48 catches for 668 yards and 4 touchdowns, and he also caught that miracle pass from Milroe in the Iron Bowl game to win and go to the playoff. He would decide to enter the 2024 transfer portal, where he quickly settled on Texas, and this past year caught 32 passes for 510 yards and 5 touchdowns. On first glance, it doesn't look that great, but at the same time, the offense was extremely loaded. There was a lot of wide receiver talent there, and he also dealt with a little bit of injury issue. According to all Texas fans, Isaiah Bond was as good as advertised, and the box score doesn't tell the whole story, so he was a really solid pickup for them, and should be a first or second round draft pick this upcoming spring, according to some scouts. So yeah, today we talked about the top transfer from each and every SEC school, talked about who they were and how they ended up doing. Be sure to let me know your thoughts down below. Should I do this for another conference? What sort of series should I do next? And just give me some sort of topic I could do in my next video. Also, before you go, don't forget to also leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about the top draft prospect for every SEC school. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.